This is actually a talk about hope. My dad was a German Jew who survived World War II but was crushed by survivor's guilt. This is him coming to Ellis Island when he was 8. He never stopped working. Although he was brilliant, he flitted from big idea to big idea, needing to save the world single-handedly in order to justify his continued existence on Earth. Needless to say, he was not successful and he died disappointed. But when I was 16, he sat me down and said, "What are you going to do to save the world?" And I heard single-handedly. And that vision, really folly, crushed me for the next 8 years until finally when I was 25, I had a quarter-life crisis because I knew I did not want to take on his life. So it was 2 men who really got me out of that dark place. The first was my first boss, Bob Purcell. He was a forester who embraced wilderness, and together we worked in the northern New England forest to protect big landscapes at a time when the timber industry was failing. And his advice to me was never take away a person's hope or dignity. And then there was Scott Nearing, who with his wife Helen founded the Back to the Land movement, where people with college educations went back to the land to earn an honest living. And his advice was do the best that you can in the place where you are and be kind. So climate change. How do you manage hope, dignity, and kindness in the face of such an existential threat? I want to introduce you to the Resilient Mystic Collaborative. So the Mystic River Watershed is located along the north shore of Boston Harbor. It's about the size of Brooklyn, New York, but fragmented into 21 cities and towns, each with their own culture and budget and rivalries and aspirations. It also hosts the highest concentration of critical infrastructure and environmental justice residents between New York City and the North Pole. So 5 years ago, our executive director, Patrick Heron, and I interviewed about 50 thought leaders in the watershed and asked them 2 questions. What are your climate challenges that you cannot manage within your tiny municipal boundaries, and how can we help? They had great ideas. They said, we want to do stuff on the ground to make our people and places safer, and we have no one on staff who's tasked with looking across those boundaries. Might as well be dragons. Could you facilitate us? And we want to lead. So the Resilient Mystic Collaborative launched in September 2018. The members continue to be senior municipal staff with content experts in environmental justice, public health, and land use. They came up with what became a very, very successful playbook. We're data-driven, we're action-oriented, we're optimistic. We want to make our communities both safer but also more beautiful. And we're not afraid of failure. We'll try something again. Let me give you a sense of what this looks like on the ground. So I love the ocean. I'm from a coastal culture and I have a biology background. But this presentation isn't about protecting the ocean from people. It's unfortunately about protecting people from the ocean because of decisions we made in the past and continue to make that put people in harm's way. So here's an aerial view of the Mystic Watershed just a few years ago, and here is an aerial view of when my mom was born, and she's still with us. But this is before we put a dam in, and look at how much space we gave the river to flood and move around. But then in the 1960s, we put in the Amelia Earhart Dam, and our inland communities forgot that the river was set at mid-tide and built right up to the edge of it, and now we're in trouble as sea level rise continues. This is an aerial photo panning back of more of the Mystic, and here's a drawing of what it looked like in 1900 before we started filling in land for our houses and businesses and never contemplated sea level rise. Our ancestors, it took a lot of work and a lot of dirt to fill that all in. But the marshes remember, because look, guess what it's going to look like with about 4 more feet of ocean. So what do you do with a map like that? First, you have to understand what's at stake. Just because something floods doesn't mean that it does harm. We need to understand what places flood first when we get our own Hurricane Katrina or Superstorm Sandy. Resilient Mystic Collaborative Communities got state funding a few years ago to partner with the major infrastructure managers of our airport, our wastewater plant, our oil terminals, to see what would happen, what would break, and then when that broke, what would happen to the people who can least afford to have their lives disrupted.
Hi, everyone. I'm meteorologist Eric Fisher. We have a doozy of a winter storm gearing up here. Now, we're still a few days out, so things will likely shift at least a little bit as we get closer over the course of the weekend. But as it stands right now, classic setup for a slow-moving big nor'easter. This one will be swinging for the fences. We'll call it Big Papi.
So Eric Fisher is a real meteorologist, but Big Papi was not a real storm. So when we partnered with infrastructure managers, they played this emergency exercise with a 2050 big nor'easter. The thing that was so exciting is we got 13 different facilities together so we could see the cascading effects of what happened when one went down, what would happen to the next. Eversource would call out, the grid's down, and the T would say, well, the subway's down because they rely on energy. After that, we saw what would break during a storm and what took a lot of time and money to recover from. We then went to community organizations. They reached out to 400 folks, very low income, many people of color, about half who spoke something besides English as their first language. And we asked them what would happen to them when public services were disrupted. They had very different answers. I have to get to work to pay rent and to pay for food. If the schools aren't open, my kids have nowhere to go. I don't have Wi-Fi. I depend on my cell phone for information to everything. So we put that information from both groups of people together and created a punch list of projects to both design and then fund and then build, focused on those people who needed it most. Since 2018, we've raised over $30 million for these projects, and we're working to get another $100 million over the next 3 years. So we do a lot of lobbying and fundraising to secure these resources, but we also celebrate. I just want to show you what $30 million of grants looks like. And of course, we never forget the cake. I want to go back to hope. Public philosopher Dr. Cornel West makes a distinction between hope and optimism. He says optimism is the belief that things are going to turn out as you'd like. Hope is when you're convinced something is right, and so you fight regardless of the consequences. He goes on to say it's no accident, then, that hope and despair go hand in hand. Hope is a wrestling with this despair over and over, but never allowing despair to have the last word to dampen your fire, to sustain your hope in your quest for truth, goodness, beauty, and maybe the holy. I want to leave you with this. We're all going to get one of these. Our whole lives boil down to that one little dash. All our fears and aspirations, our love and despair. We can't control the world around us. We can only control our reactions to it and how we treat each other. Every day, no matter what, I choose hope. Thank you.